So today we have the privilege of having MK Guth visit us and speak about her work and speak with you. She will be introduced by Erin Medley, who is in the program It's About Time. Week 9, and 2 weeks from now, we'll have art historian Johanna Goss, and that will be the end of this quarter's art lecture series. So I'm going to have Erin introduce MK.
Through video, photography, and social sculpture, MK Guth re-images traditional fables and popular fantasies, inserting new hybrid mythologies into the public realm as vehicles for agency, empathy, and social engagement. In her often humorous narratives, Guth collides art and life in performative orchestrations of practical magic, confounding discrimination between fantasy and verity. Her method is especially poignant given popular culture's obsession with reality television and other forms of mass mediation. Indeed, Guth's practices takes as axiomatic that what-ifs are destined to become real despite their hypothetical premises. She is shown at the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, San Francisco, Franklin Parish Gallery, New York City, the Melbourne International Arts Festival, Australia, and the White Columns, New York City. Guth is a founding member of the Red Shoe Delivery Service and an ongoing collaborative performance project. She is the recipient of a Betty Bowen Special Recognition Award, represented by the Elizabeth Leach Gallery in Portland, Oregon, and is an associate professor at the Pacific Northwest College of Art. It is my pleasure to introduce to you MK Guth.
Look at that. Thank you, Erin. Hello, Evergreen State College. Thank you for inviting me. And special thanks to Shaw OSHA for extending the invitation. I totally appreciate it. I love being here. So the first image I'm showing is early work of mine from the 1990s, and it's a mosaic. It's a small dress, about the size of a doll dress, turned inside out, coated in resin, and inlaid in honeybees. And this is really how I got my start in the arts. I started out in craft. But I'm kind of a lousy crafts person, I have to say. And this is because I'm not good at dedicating myself to one medium and the skill set necessary to kind of fulfill the promise of that medium. I often describe myself in the old adage, I'm a jack of all trades, but I'm an expert in none. However, what I did gain out of working in craft, and what I do gain out of working in craft, is a joy of process and process-oriented work, as well as an interest in the traditions and the histories that are embedded in craft and how those histories affect and shift the meaning of a work. From craft, I moved into sculpture, but it didn't take long before I stopped making discrete objects that sat on pedestals or on shelves and started making objects that depended on each other to create meaning, to make meaning. In other words, I moved into installation. And what I gained during this period of time was an understanding of the authority of the object. This is a picture my dad took in the 1950s, and he was a documentary photographer during World War II. And growing up, there was really no point in time that we were not being photographed, filmed, or videotaped in later years. And it's kind of like growing up in the Wisconsin version of the Truman Show. So it was really no surprise when moving image and photography started to creep into my art making. Oh yeah, and I don't have an undergraduate degree in art. I have an MFA in art, and in fact, until just recently, I was running an MFA program. But my undergraduate degree is in sociology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And the sociology department there is very research-oriented. So by the time I was a sophomore, I was already developing and learning strategies for research, and strategies and methodologies that still play into my making today. So why am I telling you all this? Well, I'm a very multidisciplinary artist. And in order for me to kind of weave in all of the histories and influences and peculiarities that make up my work, I feel like I kind of have to start from the beginning. And I look at this as a genealogy. And when I say genealogy, I mean that kind of in the way that Michel Foucault orders this term. And Foucault describes genealogies as gray, meticulous, and patiently documentary. They operate on a field of entangled and confused parchments on documents that have been scratched over and recopied many times. Genealogies take into consideration the small bits and pieces, the scraps, the small moments, as well as momentous moments. They take into consideration, genealogy takes into consideration sentiment. And what I appreciate about that term, as opposed to looking at history, is that with genealogies, they exist, all of this exists on one plane. For Foucault, a genealogy is not hierarchical. Okay. Now it's time for some video.
Officer, what exactly am I here for?
Ma'am, I'll be the one asking the questions here. Do you recognize the person in this photograph?
Yeah, I do. It's a guy that ripped off a bag from this woman in my neighborhood the other day, a couple days ago.
Well, you happen to fit the description of a person who assaulted this man. How would you like to respond to this charge?
I didn't assault this guy. I mean, this woman was walking down the street, he grabbed her bag, and I ran after him and got the bag back. I didn't assault him. If anything, I was trying to do a good deed.
So at any point, did you strike this man?
After I got the bag back, I hit him a couple times with the bag. It's a little red bag.
So you admit then that you assaulted him?
No, I didn't assault him. I got the bag back after he stole it from this woman. The guy was a jerk. I mean, he was a full-on jerk. He ripped off this woman's bag. After I got the bag back, I hit him a few times with the bag. You know? No, I didn't assault him.
So
He assaulted her.
A few times. Exactly how many times is a few times? How many times did you hit him?
I don't know, 3, 4, maybe 5 times with the bag. I mean, it was a little red bag. This did not do a lot of damage. A little bag. It just ripped somebody off.
So you say there was another woman there. Do you happen to know who this woman is?
She was walking in my neighborhood. I've never seen her before. Hey!
So you don't have anyone who can confirm your statement?
There was nobody else there. Nobody else saw what happened except this woman, me, and that guy. And I don't know who she is, but I'm sure if I found her, or we found her, she'd back up my story. I got her bag back.
Well, right now, this man is in the hospital. He's got severe bruises, lacerations. He's got a concussion. He's got a broken arm. This seems like a little more to me than just a few hits with a bag.
You know, I don't know what happened after he ripped off this woman's bag. I mean, maybe he got in another fight. I don't know. But I'm telling you, I hit him a few times with this bag. It did not give him a concussion. It did not, like, give him any abrasions or anything else. In fact, I hit him a few times and the guy ran off. I mean, you know, I don't know what happened after the fact. I don't know what kind of trouble he got in after he tried ripping off this woman's bag.
So what exactly were you doing before this incident?
I was walking home. Walking down the street, walking home.
So then you weren't out drinking or anything like that?
No, I was not out. It was mid-afternoon. Are you kidding me? No, I wasn't out drinking. What are you suggesting?
So again, ma'am, there is nobody that you know who can confirm your story?
This woman can back me up. This woman who I got her bag back. That woman, she can back up my story. I don't know who she is, but she's the witness.
So I produced this piece for my thesis exhibition in graduate school at NYU, and I like to show it because it signaled a big turning point in my thinking and my content. So in undergraduate, my interests really lied in mythologies and in labor, and in particular, the introduction of women into the workforce and how they shifted the site of production. But moving into graduate school, I started to become interested in topics around the everyday. And in particular, I was reading a French theorist called Michel Desserteaux and a text of his practices, The Practice of Everyday Life. And in this, and this is a terrible synopsis, so for the philosophers out there, I'm sorry. But what interested me in his writings was this idea that the structures and the systems that kind of hold us down or control us or determine us can be subverted, or if looked at differently, can become vehicles for escape. And that along with just the activities and gesture sequences that we perform every day, started to come into my work as content. In particular, they started this notion of everyday, the everyday, and how we act in the everyday, starts to collide with the fictional or the mythological in my work to, what I hope, create alternative representations. So what happens when a superhero can be foibled and can be just like me and not actually rescue every day, but needs to practice and so forth. It's also a point in time when I realized that narrative structure is something that I can use beyond just telling a story, that it can operate as in other ways as strategies in my work. So after graduate school, I stuck with making images and videos for till about the end of the summer. I made videos and photos that revolved around superheroes and warriors and other kind of mythical characters that then had everyday problems. And by the end of the summer, I was getting a little frustrated with my work. There was somebody earlier today in a class, we were talking about frustration. And I was becoming frustrated because I felt like all of these redesigns, these alternative representations that I was creating were always locked in the image or in the video. They were kind of hermetically sealed, and they could be contemplated, they could be viewed and contemplated, but they in no way physically activated the viewer. You couldn't feel it, you couldn't touch it, you could only think about it and look at it. And out of that frustration, Red Shoe Delivery Service was born. I started Red Shoe Delivery Service at the end of the summer, along with my roommate at the time, Molly Dilworth. And Molly and I ran this project for not quite a year before the project kind of got too big for us, and then we invited another friend of ours, an artist, Chris Moss. And I should say, all three of us went to graduate school together. So the people that you meet when you're in school, in your classes, they become your community, for the rest of your life. And I still work with these guys. Aristeas, Red Shoe Delivery Service, was an umbrella for many different projects that dealt with thematic concerns around risk-taking, transformation, and ideas of home. And while we did a lot of different projects, the core project was a mobile project. And we would get a minivan in whatever city we were in, and we were performing, and we would fill the back with red glittery shoes of all different types, tennis shoes, flip-flops, cowboy boots, you name it, we had it. And we'd offer people free rides to wherever they wanted to go. In exchange, they had to give us their shoes for the duration of the ride and wear a pair of our red glittery shoes. They'd have to click their heels and say, there's no place like work. There's no place like Plymart. There's no place like the pub. There's no place like the train station. There's no place like Federation Square. And we would videotape them and photograph them at the beginning and the end of each ride. And at the end of the day, I would edit the videos together so that they would be magically transported to their new location in a spiral of glitter and harp music. The van itself was curated out. The title of our gallery in the van was Mobile Home. And we would invite artists from the cities that we were performing in to make projects in our van. And we would hand them an essay by Salman Rushdie on the Wizard of Oz. And this essay was really a meditation on home. So and the question, what is home? Is it where you originate from? Is it the place that you construct? Is it a place that exists in your heart? And we asked artists to make work in response to that. So for example, these are two rugs for the van that Jill Odegaard made for us when we did a project in New York with the Swiss Institute. And we had an installation at the Swiss Institute, and they had a booth at the park, at the Armory Art Fair, and we did a dispatch center with them there. So you could go to the Swiss Institute and watch videos and see the installation, or you could go to this crazy mock-up dispatch center and get a ride to wherever you wanted to go. This is actually my favorite piece from all of the objects that all the art that we did in Mobile Home. And it's a photographer in Australia, Charlie Sublett. And Charlie photographed images of his neighborhood, and then he printed them out on a sticky vellum, and he put them on the windows of the minivan. And so no matter where we went, when you looked out the window, you were looking at Charlie Sublett's neighborhood. We did mock-up shoe stores, where you could come in, try on the shoes. We usually had a video station and a storytelling station. This is one we did for Pika's Time-Based Art Festival, and it was the beginning of a interactive DVD that continued at that point, that traveled with us to all of the projects. I'm not going to show it because it would take a long time, but I'm going to describe it a little bit because it's an important part of the process of RSDS. So you could go to a screen that had a grid of moving shoes, and you could click on one of those shoes, and it would take you to a narrative about one of our travelers, one of the people who participated in our project. So how we would do that, how we created that, is we would take images and a little bit of information, and we'd hand them off to writers, critics, artists who liked to write, anyone who wanted to write, and ask people to extend the narrative. And then we'd take that narrative back, and we'd make animations, video, photos, drawings. And so when you clicked onto these moving, randomly moving shoes, it would take you down the rabbit hole, down a story about one of our folks. And what we liked about this is, since RSDS was so much about the real colliding with the fictional, this part of the project allowed people to get to know our passengers in a way, but it kind of confused what was actual from what was fictional. We worked with a lot of different performance artists. This is Shrug. They're a group from London, and they rode with us when we did a project in Nottingham, England, with the Knot Dance Festival, which is a festival of interactive art. And they would ride in the back of our van, and they would offer people tea and biscuits. And when you would get into the van, so it was very inviting, but then when you get into the van, they wouldn't talk to you. However, in the beginning, especially the first day, we probably wouldn't have had any riders if it wasn't for them, because people were like, oh yeah, tea and biscuits, we'll get in. Because if you can imagine, this whole project is kind of predicated on the thing that you learn when you're 5 years old: don't get into a car with strangers, right? So we have to work really hard to get people to actually participate with it. But when we were in England, the first day we were offering people rides, and we just weren't getting anyone. And at the end of the day, the gentleman who was driving for us, another artist, they wouldn't let us drive our own van because you drive on the other side of the road, and they thought we'd get in an accident, which who knows, maybe we would have. But anyway, the guy who's driving for us, we were kind of kvetching about why we couldn't get anyone. I'm like, we're really good at this. Like, we've been doing this for a while. Like, we get people to, participate. And he's like, yeah, well, maybe you should stop offering them rides. We're like, what do you mean? Like, that's what we do. We give people a ride. He's like, yeah, but here in the UK, that's a derogatory term. It means it's kind of, you're being kind of snaky, you know? It's like if you say, I want to take you on a ride, it means something, the tone is negative. He's like, you should offer them a lift. And we're like, oh, yeah. Well, needless to say, after that, things got a lot better. So we learned an important lesson on preparing better for our projects. And when we were traveling to different locations, to learn the language and the etiquette of the places that we were in, even though they may be speaking the exact same language as we were. This is a group called Home. They're a collective in Australia. So when I said that we gave people free rides to places, that part's true. When I said that we would take them where they wanted to go, that's kind of true. So for the most part, we took people where they wanted to go, but first we often would take them on another adventure. So in this case, over a series of days, if people clicked their heels and said there was no place like Home or there was no place like wherever they wanted to go in Melbourne, we would first stop in front of the state capitol where Home was running a corn feed, and you could come and hang out with this collective and talk about your ideas of home, eat corn, and I suppose talk about the library, and then we'd sweep you off to your next location. So we would create these disruptions, and we worked in Australia with 11 different performance groups and artists, not including the people in the van, that would create kind of adventures along the way or would ride in the van. There was a group that serviced our participants both in the gallery and in the van. There were fortune tellers. There were all kinds of different ways that we would kind of disrupt the experience. We did residencies. This is with Glenbrook School in the UK. And we worked with them over a couple days with their elementary students to create drawings and stories around the possibilities for new adventures. We did all kinds of different installations and exhibitions. This is part of the project that we did for the Melbourne International Arts Festival, and we did lots of different things for them. We had this exhibition where they showed all of our shoes, a commission of new suite of photos. There was the interactive DVD. We ran storytelling for kids and also storytelling for adults. This all happened over 28 days. We did an exhibition of all of the work that had been in the van up to this point. So you can see there was video work, there were books, there was the first piece here is from an artist from New York who did a cover for our dashboard. There were audio pieces. And so we exhibited all of those. We did a virtual travel agency. That's one of the posters for our virtual travel agency. And you could come and meet with us. And we had books with tour packages, and you could look at various places that you might want to go. And if we couldn't find something in our awesome tour packages, we'd try to find it something for you online. And we would take a picture of people wearing the shoes, and then we would locate them into their virtual trip, into their virtual location, and we'd print them out a proper postcard with all the markings of that a postcard would have on the backing. And they would get one, and then we would keep one. And the thing that was so awesome about our tour company, about our travel agency over all other travel agencies, is we were not limited by space or time. So you could go to 1928 Hungary, a bar in the Basque Country. You could be shrunk down and be part of a Happy Meal, Burger King Happy Meal. You could go to the moon. You could go to Germany. Or you could go to some imaginary place. This is Holly. And Holly was a professor at the university in Melbourne, and she had just turned 50 and was going on sabbatical. And she committed all 28 days to coming and traveling to a different virtual location in preparation to figuring out where she wanted to go on her walkabout during her sabbatical. The newspaper actually did an article on Holly's adventures, and what was amazing about Holly and other participants in this project is they really made it their own thing. They took this art experience and turned it into something that served their own kind of personal needs, desires, and longings. This is the wall of postcards that we had. At the end of the Melbourne International Arts Festival, we were faced, Chris, Molly, and I were faced with the decision to either give up our jobs or put Red Shoe Delivery Service to sleep. We had been running it for 3 years, and we both had other jobs, and we all three make our own work. And we were getting to a point where it was kind of consuming pretty much all moments of our lives. And I was teaching at PNCA, and they didn't like that so much. And it was hard to get anything else done. So we made the decision to put the project to sleep at that point. And so that's the last time we've run it in a major way. We've done exhibitions with installations, but we've never run the mobile projects and the storytelling projects. People have done the interactive DVDs. And someday we may bring it back, but we decided it was time to kind of refocus on our own forms of making, and that Red Shoe had this kind of remarkable run, and that we actually didn't want to be performers kind of constantly doing schedules. So when Red Shoe Delivery Service was done, I came back home and started finishing a video called Rapunzel. And I had started this earlier in the year and just hadn't had time to finish it. And I'm not going to show the video because it'll take up too much time. But I started working on this as well as some braiding projects, which I'm going to get to in just a moment. But in this video, the Rapunzel character is a little animated version of me. And she resides in this kind of media landscape. So she's talking to the audience about how she should get out more, how she should join chat rooms, and she's talking about all the adventures that she wants to go on, but they're completely based on what she sees on television. She's a pretty messed up character, and kind of sad and funny all in the same moment. But she becomes the impetus to kind of this next body of work, and looking at this kind of princess representation. And at the end, if we have any time, I brought it, we could watch it. I started working on a new set of photos, and these aren't actually photos, they're lenticular images. So do you guys know the postcards, if you move them one way, and there's a character on it, their eyes will shut, and you move them the other way, their eyes will open? Well, that's what lenticular images are. So they're photographs that are layered, and then a plastic lens is put on top of them. You often see them in postcards, or sometimes religious images will have lenticular images. And they're hard to show in a lecture, so I'm just going to do it this way. So if you look straight on, there was a portrait. If you looked either direction, it was the person was holding a princess in their mouth. And the series was called Princess on the Tongue. And for me, this was very much about how we actually physically consume these folklore and mythological images, so how we take something that's general and kind of personalize it. So there's 3. The series, the Ultimate series ended up having 11. And after this, I was working in my studio on these braid projects. And remember I told you that Chris, Molly, and I all had other jobs? So Chris was a curator at the Linfield Gallery at Linfield University. And we had been talking about this project even when we were in Australia. And he's like, you want to come and do this at Linfield? And I was like, sure. He's like, you can do whatever you want. Whatever you want. I'm like, whatever I want. Okay, yeah, who's going to turn that down? So he gave me a 3-month exhibition at the Linfield Gallery. And during that time, and this is the culmination of the exhibition, by the way, so keep that in mind. This is the end of the 3 months. So I worked with the Linfield faculty and students and also people from McMinnville to construct a piece. So this is how the space was set up. There were instructions on the back wall, and there was the video Rapunzel. And people could come into the space over the duration of the first month, and they could write a regret on a ribbon, and either I or somebody else would weave it into this ever-growing braid. And you could have me weave it in, or I would teach you how to braid. It's a form of hair extension. So it's not like regular braiding. It's kind of like backwards braiding and knotting. And by the way, it's synthetic hair. It's not real hair. I get that question a lot. So over the duration of the month, people would come in and they would teach each other how to braid. So this site of display, right, if the gallery is the place where we show work, shifts and becomes the site of production, a place where people make work. On Wednesday afternoons, I would work with the students to make pieces that they wanted to do. So these are three of the women that would show up very often and would braid and teach other people how to braid. and they decided they wanted to braid themselves together and create temporary sculptural objects throughout the campus. That's one. There's another one. And then they braided braids on, on me and created all kinds of variations, but this piece in particular ended up becoming a lenticular image. And it was here that I kind of, through Linfield, that I got my first opportunity to work interactively alone, because up to this point I'd been working with a team. I had 2 other artists that were, we were working together, and this is the first time that I was kind of having to figure things out and how to create a community without an established community at the get-go. After this piece was done, so after the first month of interaction, then the piece remained in the gallery, that first image that I showed, as an installation for the next 2 months. In 2007, I was invited to Rio, to Brazil, to do a show at Agente Carioca in Rio de Janeiro in their project space. And this too is an interactive braid, but here the ribbons, you could read what was being said. And the question that I was asking people was what they thought, what their opinion of people from the United States were. And I'd just like to say I studied Portuguese for 6 months to do this project, and still my Portuguese was very awful. But this became the key to getting people to participate, strangely. It was the fact that people in Rio were very generous and patient, and it was an inroad for me to communicate with the audience. Could you help me say such and such a thing? And while they were helping me speak, we would be able to start to communicate, and then they would start to interact with the project. I hung a hammock in the middle of the space so people could hang out over the duration of the first week and just read the various different comments that were being made. So you can see this is written in English, but most of them are written in Portuguese. And I said that this piece was really made to show in the US. Because people always say, oh yeah, people from other countries don't really like us, but we don't really know what that means. It's kind of at a distance. And this piece, when it came back to the US and it then showed in a gallery in New York, it still kind of kept that at a distance, right? So while all that information was at everyone's fingertips, it was in a language that's not a whole lot of people speak. So it still kind of had this element that where the initial audience, the audience in Rio, had a different intimate relationship than the audience in the US. Okay. The next piece I want to show you is the largest braid project. I'm going to show you several braid projects today that I've done, and this was for the Whitney Biennial in 2008. And I was offered the option of doing a video called Allegory of Possible Hopes and Fears in the Brewer Building, or for the first time ever, the Whitney had a second site at the Park Avenue Armory. And there I could do a large interactive project. And I chose the Armory because I thought this was an opportunity to do something that was really different, that you wouldn't expect to see or encounter as part of the Whitney Biennial. This being said, the Park Avenue Armory's building in itself is this amazing historic building, and it's replete with meaning. Its spaces are filled with history. So when they gave me the Park Avenue Armory Library, I felt like I had to do a project that connected to the space itself, because trying to compete with this building, in my mind, was like kind of a no-win situation. The building itself was pretty remarkable. So my piece was located in the library, and the library was designed by Tiffany and Company. And it was mahogany, and it was very masculine, very dark, and the sides were filled with glass cases that held trophies and awards from various different military groups and organizations. So I also wanted this piece to connect, not because the armory there is something that represents the entire nation, I wanted it to connect kind of broader than just to a community in New York. Sorry about that. So the piece is called Ties of Protection and Safekeeping, and the question that I asked people was what they thought was worth protecting. And it started out in Portland, Oregon, and it was interactive in Portland for one day, and it took place at the Girding Theater at the Armory, our Armory. Then it went to the Cleveland Institute of Art for a day, to the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, to the Boise Art Museum. I think I missed one. Oh yeah, to the Atlantic Contemporary Art Center, to the Boise Art Museum, to Diverse Works in Houston, Texas, and then finally back to the library at the Park Avenue Armory, where it was 500 feet at that point. This is my braiding team. We're missing one here. There was actually 5 of us. So 5 of us worked on this project. I often make uniforms for my interactive projects. So this is an example of the uniforms. They're based on Civil War jackets. So there was 5 of us braiding at any point in time for the duration of 10 days. And you could come in, write on a ribbon, and we would braid it into this ever-extending, growing braid. With each day, it grew larger and larger and larger until, in essence, it consumed the library space. And what you no longer could easily see the trophies and the cases and the awards. It was difficult to move through the space. And in essence, this very organic and feminine form overtakes this very masculine space, and this contemporary notion of protection overtakes its site of this historical site that represents that idea. When creating this piece, because I think when you look at this, it can't help but suggest Duchamp's Mila string. This was the piece that helped me kind of sort out how to go about this and how I wanted this piece to operate. So this is from the first papers of Surrealism exhibition in 1942, and Duchamp strung a Mila twine throughout the exhibition, obstructing your view of the other artworks and space and making it difficult to move through. Another aspect of my practice is generative. So when I make things and I do interactive projects, other things come out, other artworks come out of those interactions. So for example, with Red Shoe Delivery Service, videos came out, interactive DVDs came out of it. And in this case, there were a series of drawings that I continually do. I mean, I could be drawing till the day I died, because there's so many ribbons. Oh, by the way, the end of the piece for the Whitney was 1/3 of a mile long at its completion. It was pretty big. So I don't know if you can see this, but they're little drawings. It's the language that's in the, on the ribbons. And I take that out and I draw them in these knotted braids. So the little lines are actually tiny little braids. And hidden in those knots are the language that are hidden in the braids, so this one says record album, autonomy, 35 millimeter film. After I finished this piece, I went on for the rest of the year and did a series of different group shows and other interactive pieces that kind of connected to the braid pieces. But the next year, I wanted to move back just for a moment, to a breather, to go back to something that was more traditional for me, to go back to video and object making. And also, during this time working with these interactive projects, I became more and more interested in the shift of the site and how you could change the purpose of a site. For example, a site of display could become a site of production, that you could affect the tone of a place, that you could make something in an armory that also became a work of art and changed the kind of the tone of the place itself. I was also reading a piece, a work by Balzac called The Magic Skin. I don't know if any of you guys have ever read it, but in The Magic Skin, there's a place, there's a curio shop, and in this curio shop, this is where the magic skin exists, and there's, in this curio shop exists great works of art like Poussins and velvet couches and taxidermied animal heads and various different baubles. But because they're all together, all of the works in there, the great works of art, the velvet couches, and the taxidermied animal heads, all kind of reside on the same level. Their values become equal, rather than the great art being worth more than the velvet couch. And I was interested in how one could shift the tone of a space. So this show was at the Elizabeth Leach Gallery in Portland, and it was called Terrain Change. And I removed all the lighting apparatus in the gallery and replaced them with groupings of chandeliers. So all of the spotlights and track lightings that point to the walls that tell you how the value of something, that signifies the value of whatever's hanging on the wall. It has a particular light quality that's very clean and crisp. Gets replaced by this very kind of romantic and dim light of the chandeliers. And on the floor exists all of these umbrellas that are made out of winter wear, out of blankets, coats, mittens, and so forth. And in the back room is the video Allegory of Possible Hopes and Fears. I'll see you on the other side. I have a couple images of it. It's a 9-minute video, so I'm not going to play it. But the video is an indeterminate narrative that revolves around two characters, an out-of-work logger and a mermaid whose lake has frozen over, and kind of their codependent relationship that develops. During this time, I was invited to do a project in Lower Manhattan. So after this, I went back to New York for a 3-month project that I worked with 3 different organizations: Lower Manhattan Council, the World Financial Center, and Under the Radar, which is a performance schedule much like TBA's Time-Based Art Festival. And this project lasted for 3 months. It was called This Fable is Intended for You, a Work Energy Principle. And for the first 6 weeks, there was people from Lower Manhattan could come in and donate materials. And so people donated T-shirts and napkins and curtains and tablecloths and sweaters and you name it. It was various different forms of fabric were donated. And over the first week, they were sorted and hung and kind of displayed in different ways. And after that, I started cutting them down. And Molly Dilworth, who is helping with Red Shoe Delivery Service, also helped me with this project. And so each day we would either cut things down, sew them together. No matter what we did them together. So this residency in Lower Manhattan takes place in an old floor shop, and there's windows all the way around it. So you can stand outside and watch. You can walk in as well. But when we worked in unison. It was kind of like a 2-person Busby Berkeley. So it was choreographed labor. So the site of production was on display itself and performed. At the end, we had made a series of 66-foot braided ropes out of all the materials that people gave us, and 24 performance volunteer performers wore backpacks with 66 feet of rope connected to the backpack and then another 15 feet in the backpack itself. And for 4 days, they did a performance for Under the Radar Festival. This is the World Financial Center, and it's the atrium of the World Financial Center. This section was all damaged during the World Trade Center bombings. And so this is part of the reason I was invited to do this project. So we felt it was significant to start here. This particular space is, if you haven't been there, if you ever go to New York, it's pretty remarkable. It's a huge glass atrium with this glass dome top on it. So the performers start on the top, and there's a trumpet player that plays a series of notes. And those notes suggest a certain formation. And with each set of notes, the performers would move throughout the space, creating different geometric shapes that mimic the architecture of the space. There was also an exhibition as part of this project, and in the World Financial Center has a gallery. So the backpacks stayed there, so when the performers would go into the gallery, get their backpacks, and perform, and then they would go back into the gallery at the end of the performance. And the performances lasted an hour each day for 4 days. And then there were in the exhibition, there were other gestures that had taken place during the residency. When all of this was done, after the 3 months, those ropes came back into my studio, and much like the drawings from the Whitney braid, this is also part of an ongoing practice where those ropes get braided into different vessels and objects. So in a way, they kind of hold the residue of the interaction, but become something else. The last braid piece that I'm going to show you today took place in Las Vegas, and it was hosted by the Art Production Fund out of New York, and they managed the piece that I did at the Whitney. And we had talked about doing this piece in 2008, but it was very difficult to find a location that would allow me to do it, and you'll see why in a few moments. So Best Wishes lasted for 20 days. P3 Studios is a gallery in the Cosmopolitan Hotel in Las Vegas. It's such a crazy place for a gallery. But it allowed this project to take place in a very particular way because it was attached to my body. So for 20 days, people could come into the space and they could write on the ribbon a wish, because let's face it, it's Las Vegas. What do people do in Las Vegas? You know, they have great aspirations and wishes. And there was two braiders that would sit behind me at all times and weave them into my hair. So as you can see, they are connected. And every day I would come into the space. We would hang the growing braids up into the architecture of the building, kind of connecting me to the building itself. We performed the project for 8 hours, 9 hours. And at the end of the day, my assistant, Lydia Rosenberg, who's now in graduate school in Philadelphia, would unwind me and take me, kind of disconnect me from the building itself. We'd wind up the braids, and they would get put into a coat that I designed that would hold the weight of the braids. And then the last week, they became too heavy to even for the coat to hold very well. So then they went into that little wagon that you can see in the back corner there. And I would roll back up to my room. On the last day, the braids were cut. But the evening before and during that morning, I moved throughout the hotel in Las Vegas, having images shot of me as this kind of mythical character. After the exhibition was done, so the piece remained in the gallery until the end of the month, that braid too came back to my studio, and it was woven into this piece, which then went on to, which has gone on to show in other places. So remember when I talked to you earlier, I mentioned the importance of the authority of the object? So for me, that's a very important part of my kind of interactive, kind of socially engaged work. People often ask me if I'm a social practice artist, and I always tell them no, that I'm not. And the reason for that is because for me, these interactions that I have, they exist only in that moment, kind of like what we're having together right now, right? So whatever we're experiencing is unique to us in this moment. Maybe you're a little hungry, maybe you're tired, maybe, look at, you're yawning, see, like right on, you're a little tired, you're ready for lunch. You can hear the buzz of the projector or the heat in here or the way this place smells. It's particular. And a photograph or a videotape of this experience doesn't really capture that experience. For me, when images, and this is just for me, so when images, photos, and videos are shown of documentation in galleries, for me, that just tells the audience kind of what they missed. It doesn't offer up something new to the project or even offer up experience. It tells them about something that occurred that other people experienced that they did not. Because let's face it, you're gonna leave here and you'll think about this in one way. I'll think about it in a totally different way. And all of that dissipates at the end of this. And a photograph can't encapsulate that. So for me, it's important, as it was for Red Shoe Delivery Service, and we made a concerted effort to stick to this, that when we did interactions, we never showed documentation, except in lectures, of what we do, or in the braid projects, it's the same case, or in any of my interactive projects. The things that come out of it are new objects that hold different meaning, and they may hold the residue of that original experience, kind of like a vessel, But it doesn't try to illustrate that experience. It tries to offer up something new, an experience that's particular to the object itself. So on that note, I'm going to show you kind of the last body of work. So now, this is kind of the work that I've been concentrating on most recently over the last couple years. And it started with this body of work here, When Nothing Else Subsists, Smell and Taste Remained. It comes from Trevor. It's a quote from a Proust novel, Remembrance of Things Past. There we go, goes back to the curriculum. And if, in many ways, this project is the absolute opposite of Aristeas and all of those braid projects. If those projects created an interaction was established to create an object or an image, this uses objects and images to suggest an interaction, to suggest more animated participation. So in this particular show, there was a sound piece here where people could sit down and listen to the people ruminating over their experiences with food, and they were everything from great moments to the things that they hated to connections between Wonder Bread and Andy Warhol. There was a large table that sat in the middle of the room, I'll get to that later, that was filled with various different books. And then throughout the space, there were a series of still lifes. Oh, there's a suite of photos as well, of cookbooks. The rest of the space, the objects were what I call still lifes, and they were made up of some form of shelf, a one-of-a-kind book, and other objects. And usually there were a series of books. So in this case, this is called A Dinner for John Cage, and the book itself holds the instructions and recipes for a dinner around John Cage. And there's a bronze ladle and some mushrooms, because John Cage was a big mushroom guy. He started the Mycology Society in New York, and he has a composition called Variations at Mushrooms. So in the instructions of this dinner for 10 people, the 10 people are required to perform compositions at mushrooms. And in this way, there's this experience that can be had through the still life itself. And I'm going to try to unpack this more as we go on, because I think seeing these in person is different than kind of seeing them as a slide. So they have the possibility of contemplative viewing, right? You can just look at it as a still life. Or you can take them off the wall, sit on the table, and page through them. You can do, a Desserteau kind of thing and photograph the recipes and the instructions. You can poach, right? You can poach the information and do it yourself. Or some people actually have these now, and they can actually create the dinners. There's an archive in the back of each book. So there's instructions, there's recipes, there's images, there's drawings, and there's content that connects to the themes. There's a dinner, in this show there was a dinner for the woods. Those are pie irons. It's the first time I ever did casting in, not stainless steel, with frying pans, cast iron. And I was terrible at it. It took like 8 tries to get those done. There was a dinner for an artist. This is based on a Toulouse-Lautrec dinner. And so Toulouse-Lautrec was a really famous chef, and he and his gallerist would make these remarkable dinners. And there's one particular dinner that became very famous, and this is based on this. So the objects were the plates, and then in this dinner, Toulouse-Lautrec, at the end of the dinner, invites all of his guests into the parlor, which they had back then, for dessert. And Toulouse-Lautrec explains to his guests that for his meals, that every sense must be encountered: scent, taste, and sight. And he then reveals under this cloth a painting by a new artist, Degas. I just love that, a new artist, Degas. And so the whole dinner becomes about a celebration of an artwork and an artist. So in this, all of the recipes are Toulouse-Lautrec's recipes, and the instructions involve introducing a group of, the group at the dinner to a new artist or an artwork. There was a dinner for a funeral. This is based on an Alain Bosquet poem called A Choice Implies a Funeral. He's a surrealist poet. And for me, this poem is about that kind of in-between space, that space when you make a decision like, I'm going to go to Evergreen College. Then all the other decisions, all the other choices you were thinking about fall off. So it's kind of the end of one thing and the celebration of something new, this kind of threshold space. In this, people were asked to read a poem by Czesław Miłosz, who's a Polish poet. And I pronounced that right, didn't I? I'm looking at you. I think I got it right. Which is all about the table and eating together. And then the book was filled with thresholds, images of thresholds. There was a dinner for crying. So to give you an idea, those are all beer mugs, and they all have a poem etched in them. So when I said there's other content, so for example, all of the books have research and quotes and elements that comes from this research. So in this quotes from Goethe, if you've never eaten while crying, you don't know what life tastes like. This is an example of the instructions. So a dinner for crying is for 6 people, including the host, no more, no less. Sorry, I can't read it it's too small in here. This dinner is designed to be a cathartic event, a release, a cleansing, where a good cry is celebrated, encouraged through the camaraderie of drinking and eating. This dinner inspires guests to cry into their beers. The host or hosts of the dinner can invite guests who they believe have something to cry about, which might be fulfillment and happiness, as well as failure, loss, and sadness, or other negative feelings such as stress, anger, and frustration, or guilt. Alternatively, the host can invite guests around a common concern that is worthy of crying. The topic can be general or more intimate. Examples of possible crying-worthy topics would be preferred candidate lost an election, preferred candidate won an election, favorite neighborhood tree was cut down, the closing of a favorite bar, restaurant, store, theater, favorite team lost a game, friend is moving to another city, stressful deadline, stress in general, a breakup, world weariness, being fired or laid off, being homesick, missing someone, a homecoming, winning the lottery, falling in love, receiving an honor, the end of war, a wedding, a death, the last straw. And then the instructions go on. So in this case, there's no actual recipes. They're just suggestions for food. The food for this dinner are all like smoked foods and sour foods and pickled foods. And then there's images in it as well. There was a dinner for getting lost. So you can see most of them had a collection of other books that connected to the theme. And again, like drawings or ink, and then text. And then there was finally the table. So going back to kind of what a space, an art space, does to work, when something goes into a gallery or an institutional space, it starts to determine the value of that thing. So for example, if I put a black frying pan in the Whitney Biennial, people are going to see that differently than they are if it's in my kitchen, right? It elevates things. And I wanted to find a way to get people to interact with the books without giving them didactic language. And the one object that I felt was stronger than what the institutional space does to things that reside within it was a table and chairs. Because if there's a table and chairs, the purpose of that object is stronger in my mind than the space itself. It was filled with books that connected to the themes of the dinner. So people could go in, take the books off the shelf. They could look at these books, hang out at the table, or they could take the books off the shelves and read them, and as I was saying before, like poach information, which was encouraged. And then finally, these are some of the pieces, and this is something I've been working on now. So some of the new works actually exist in carrying cases. So it's like a little, Duchamp carrying case that has the whole art project right in it. And in this case, a dinner for the bowl, there's actually instructions that are etched into the spoons for the dinner. So this one says, talk about your favorite soups. And in that whole thing, in that book, it's like the history of soup and soups from all around the world. And they all have different, so everybody who has a spoon will have something else that would engage a conversation. And I want to finish up, but just on this image. It's a piece I finished for the Contemporary Art Center in Cincinnati, and it comes down Monday. And it was also a braid project called Fireworks Astronaut Deep Pool Venus. And people could come in for the duration of 4 days and write their memories that were then woven by this team into those colored braids that were coming off of my body. And then when it was done, it hung in the space in the lobby of the Contemporary Art Center, which is an amazing building. It's a Zaha Hadid building. Yeah, and it's coming down in a couple days. So thank you very much for your patience and for listening. There we go. Yep.
What was the most significant resource you found to starting your work?
I think for me, actually becoming an artist was significant in its own right, because it wasn't a path I was initially going down. I really thought I was going to go down a research path. And I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin, so it just wasn't something you did. Like, I didn't know anybody who did art. I mean, my mom made pottery, my dad was a photographer, but I didn't know people who made art and showed in galleries. And so I think to answer that question sincerely, I would say, like, kind of developing the confidence to make my own work and to show it was a big deal. Like, I have drawings, I drew throughout my entire childhood. I took art classes when I was at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, but it really wasn't until like the 90s that I felt comfortable actually making work. And I think that it's not one particular thing that's significant, but for me, it's all those variations and understanding that they all matter. The fact that I was the daughter of a photographer holds the same amount of weight for me as the first time, that I saw a great work of art. Did that answer your question? No. Okay. Well, add to it. Like, unpack what you're trying to get at.
What kind? Did you need connections or material resources?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I think for me, I was making these little mosaic objects that were showing kind of more in craft stores or craft galleries. They weren't stores. They were like more craft galleries. And I was super naive. And my first show was one of those insect pieces. I can't even believe I'm telling this. I'm telling you things that actually embarrass me. And there was a show that was happening at Pica, and it was called the Garden Show. And I had been making these insect pieces. I had made this little swimming suit that was covered with honeybees. And I was like, that's totally relevant to the garden. And so I called them up, and I asked them if I could be part of their show. And Christy Edmonds is like, wow, how'd you even get to me? And she's like, no, that's not how this works at all. You apply for it, and then maybe we consider you. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm just new to this. And she was very kind, and she's like, what is it? And I'm like, it's a little swimming suit inlaid in bees. She's like, bring it in. And that was my first kind of real art show. And they took it, and it sold, and it was a big deal. And then all of a sudden, another gallery gave me a show. And then a gallery in Houston picked me up based on that show. And then I applied for the Betty Bowen Award, and my friend Nan was like, don't apply for that. You'll never get that. You don't even know what you're doing. And I got it. And I would say that the biggest factors are I go out and I meet a lot of people. Early on, I applied for everything. I was naive, and I just applied for things, and I didn't get them all the time, but once in a while I got things. I make work all the time. Like, I make work like a bunny. So it's like I'm always making something. And so when that moment happens, there's stuff in my studio. I work for this guy, Paul Ramirez Jonas. Do you guys know who he is? Pretty famous artist. He's married to Janine Antoni, if that name rings a greater bell. And I worked for him, and he told me at one point there were 3 types of artists. Artists that, he said all these terrible things to me that scarred me forever. So now I'll share them with you. There are three types of artists. Artists who are super connected but don't make any work. And then there's artists that make tons of work but they never come out of their basement. And then there's that rare artist that makes work and goes out and makes connections, and that's the artist that survives. So, and I see my students, my MFA students do it. They've changed the climate of Portland, Oregon, because they get out, they curate each other into shows, they make things happen, and they move to other cities. So like one of my students is now programming for Bruce Quality High Foundation in New York, and of course he's programming students that he knows. You're each other's connections. Was that a better answer?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. You just needed to help me a little. Yes?
Why red shoe delivery service?
It's,
Why not like ruby slippers or something?
well, because I wanted to, it's a great question. Because I also wanted it to connect to labor. So I wanted people to be thinking about taxis and travel. And so I wanted this fictional thing, this Dorothy's Ruby Slippers, to collide with the more practical, how do I get from point A to point B? I gotta pay a taxi cab, I gotta take the bus. So I wanted both of those things to come together so that it wasn't also overly romantic.
Yeah, just with the whole fairy tale connection, red shoes make me think, well, they're good for getting you home, just don't go dancing in them.
Right, because that story is pretty bad. She doesn't, the red shoe story where she doesn't stop dancing. Yeah, yeah. And also, you know, we want a little, you know, you don't want to give it all away. And I feel like this project gives a lot away. So, yeah, good question. Yeah.
So a law professor or legal scholar of some sort gave a presentation a couple weeks ago and was talking about free speech legislation and how there's very important legal distinction between expression and conduct. And it seems like your work kind of collapses that distinction, or aims to in
Yep.
some ways. And it makes sense that the state would want to distinguish because it has some interest in deciding what people can and can't do. But outside of that context, like without that vested interest in legislation and enforcement, do you think that distinction exists, or is it important? Or
I may have to ask you to unpack that as well, but let me say one thing. As an artist who works with the public, legality is a biggie. So every person that rode with Red Shoe Delivery Service had to sign a waiver. Had to sign a waiver, photo images, for us to use their photo images, their video images, and for them to actually get into our van. So, you know, when I said, I wasn't kidding when I said RSDS was taking over our lives, because there were contracts, there were legalities, there were so many things that besides making the experience or making the art that has to be taken into consideration. I don't mean to kind of make the art world sound not so lovely, but it is a business. Like, you're running it all of the time, and there are legal ramifications that you have to take into consideration when you're making work and working with the public. There is a residency in New York. Anyone can apply for it, and it's the art and law residency, and you work directly with lawyers. And so they teach you issues of copyright, you read text together, and I think it's 6-month residency, and then at the end you have an exhibition somewhere. It's pretty cool. So did that get anywhere close? Unpack it.
think about it from another angle. Well, you talked earlier about your moving to an interest in this idea of the everyday, and which, I don't know, kind of recalled like Van Gog's revolution of everyday life and the
Right.
whole suppression realization of art and the distinction between artists as a specialized group and everyday people or everyday life as we experience it, and how maybe, you know, some people have suggested that that distinction is put there by certain power apparati for a certain interests they have, and that maybe part of some liberatory project is eradicating those distinctions.
Well, I mean, RSDS definitely shifts that to a certain degree, and so do a lot of the braid projects. I mean, so I don't believe that when people say that I want to make art for everybody, I just like that, I don't buy that. You're making art for various different audiences and populations. And there is a particular art-going audience, right? There's an audience that goes to certain types of galleries and certain types of museums, and then other places. And then there's the audience on the street. And there's the audience that would come into the Park Avenue Armory, but would not go in, would not go into the Brewer Building and, you know, drop 20 bucks. So these projects are kind of designed to navigate multiple audiences, but they are designed for particular audiences. Like I try to, and I've learned that, like you can't, going to different countries and working with different populations has taught me that you have to take into consideration what people's etiquette is. How we worked with an Aboriginal community, and it's the first Aboriginal community that connected to the art festival. They've been trying to get people to work with them for years, and they came to us, because they said that we just didn't have an agenda, which isn't true. We did have an agenda. It just wasn't the same agenda. It was something that was much more accessible. So I think these works of art, when I talk about Michel Desserteau or Paul Frere is another person that I think about a lot, and the pedagogy of the oppressed, or like Rancière's The Ignorant Schoolmaster, this being able to create experiences and works that disrupt those primary systems and create a fissure. And in many ways, it's no different than colliding the everyday with the fictional or the mythological, because the mythological is a collapsed system, right? You know, even if you think of like, you know, very prosaic superhero like Spider-Man, we think of him as being flawed and foible, but you know, he's flawed and foibled always the same way. He's always flawed the same way. He always doesn't get the girl. He always is a complainer. You know, it's like, it's repetition. So you can't enter that. We can't enter those representations. So it's the same with institutional space. You can create maybe a small gap and start to break things apart in that way. Is that better? Did that get more to it? Okay. Anything else? Greg?
Could you talk about being a project manager? Because it seems to me that a lot of your work, just as you have to be concerned with the law,
Yeah.
you have to be concerned about collaboration and
Yeah.
managing people. And so what, is that something that you just had to learn on your own, or how did you come to that? Or how does project management and artistic creation work together for you?
For these projects, it's essential. So, and I feel like a lot of work today is project management based work. There's aesthetics. Oh, there's a great essay. I can't think of the name right now. But starting from conceptual artists, moving to now, and how this, looking at people like Baldessari or Saul LeWitt, and how even then so much of their work is happening actually in an office, and the creation of it, the aesthetics of administration. Boom, there we go. So I think it was trial and error and a lot of failure. So yeah, I'm a fan of failure. Failure is great. It's a great learning tool. But paying attention, so when you fail, that you know the next time maybe you should do things a little differently. So a lot of it came from that. You know, I've held so many different jobs in my life. From, you know, I worked all the way through undergrad. I've kind of balanced so many different things that I think part of it has become a little bit natural, where I'm working, I'm making, and that gives me a set of organizational skills. But, you know, part of it was failing and realizing that if I wasn't, the first few things that Molly and I ran for Red Shoe Delivery Service were pretty off the cuff and became extremely problematic because we were not controlling the situation. So, you know, these projects, your autonomy goes right out the window because folks are entering into the making of the work. So we'd have to design a flexible structure so that that autonomy can be disrupted, but you still get to make a work that you've authored. And I think Molly and I went to a lecture on business, a business lecture at one point. on business plans because we were having so many contracts that we were overwhelmed and we didn't know what to do. And I think realizing that every little detail matters, and realizing that when you're working with the public that anything can get disrupted. So you have to create a structure, but it has to be nimble. We would take, RSDS would take residencies. It was where I cut my teeth, no doubt. We would take residencies where we shut ourselves in for like 3 days at a time and just make the work and create these elaborate systems. And as the project got bigger, then they would give you a manager, but still, that's what you do. And I've been, some of you who will end up going into the arts will be curating. And if you go into writing, you'll be creating lecture series and reading groups. That's all the same thing. It's organizing and keeping really good notes and getting back to people who email you. Getting back to people who email you is the biggest thing to do to save your art career. Just really, because when you're tired, you just don't want to contact people. But you got to do it anyway.
So, there's you also. You also are the subject, even though there's an interaction with the public. And it seems that there's a history like Carolee, I think it's Carolee Schneeman, but it could be Abramovich, they're braided together for a period of time, or pulling against each other, or people have been chained together, the early performative endurance stuff.
Yeah.
There's something that is, there's sort of images of you with the heavy burden with you in the Sino, and we're kind of interesting images. So what about you and the burden, or?
Yeah, that's all a construct. Yeah. I mean, you make a choice when you're in your own work, you make a choice on how you represent yourself. And in those, and I've done a few of them. I did a piece at Yerba Buena that asked people what they thought a feminist was, and it was all woven off of my body. And, so it was really about the burden of that term. And, you design that like anything else. That's part of the reason that there's uniforms. So those uniforms start to establish an aesthetic and a tone so that people understand your character, because that's what it is. It's a character. And in doing the pieces where it's connected to my body, and this was the same with RSDS, I don't want to be a Marina Abramovich. I don't want people to focus on, because it is an endurance project. I just want to tell you, not peeing for 8 hours, not easy. It's like you only have a big cup of tea one time, and then you never make that mistake again. It's like serious, and you're carrying a ton of weight. At the end, those braids weighed 250 pounds. Think about having 250 pounds hanging off your neck. That's why there was a jacket. That's why I had an assistant. But I didn't want people to come in and think that. I wanted them to come in and talk to me. So there were nice little cushy things for them to sit on. There was a casual environment, and for them to engage in something so that they weren't caught up in the endurance aspect, and that when they walked away, they thought about the endurance aspect, but that's not the first thing they confronted. Because as soon as that's the first thing that they confront, then nobody's going to talk to you. Because then you become that elite moment, that rarefied thing. And I didn't want that role, so I worked really hard at kind of downplaying that and creating this other persona that was accessible to people, even though fundamentally those works are completely about holding the burden of opinion, of idea, and they're rooted in those histories. They're rooted in a lot of feminist work, early feminist work.
I'm curious about your sociological research that you were doing in your undergraduate degree, because I feel like there's pretty just the convergence of that with sitting in a room and having people asking them to write down questions and put it into this thing that is and I'm just curious about what kind of research you did and how that converges with your art.
So as I said, it's a very research facility. That's a department. That's how Madison rolls. It's also Marxist. So a lot of the things that I was reading at the time, I was really involved with the text by a woman, Ruth Milkman. She's at that time she was teaching at UCLA, and she talked a lot. She looked at labor from World War II, and when different populations insert themselves into a established system, how that disrupts that system. I was reading a lot of theory around folklore and mythologies and how those narrative structures start to determine where we stand. I was really interested in a cat, an early sociologist, Georg Simmel. Anyone know him? Turn of the century sociologist, and he's not. It's much better for my art than it was ever for being in Madison, but he writes on also kind of on everyday elements. He has this text called Faithfulness, Generosity and Faithfulness, and kind of which looks at the power structure of giving a gift, which, you know, we always think like, if I give you a thing, it's just all about me being generous. But he really kind of analyzes that and looks at how power plays into that. The difference for me and between doing sociological or any form of research and dealing with data in art is that and this is important for me. So I don't want people to sit and just read things. You know, I'm not interested in that. So for example, for the Whitney piece, you could go to a website that you could add whatever you wanted on the website. So it continually generated, but they would layer on top of each other, so it was difficult to read them. Because these works, when you're asking a question, people can get caught up in just reading the data. And that data isn't always that interesting. So when you ask people what's worth protecting, it's those individual moments, not so great. Some of them are pretty cool. Some of them are pretty thoughtful and profound, and some of them are really trite and redundant. But when you think about them together, collapsed together, they create meaning. You think about this contemporary notion of protection and all the different voices that come into that. And that's far more interesting to me. When the poetics emerge, there's much more room to fit yourself in, to imagine, with data. And so in Madison, you basically, the program that I was in, you had to minor in statistics. That was fun. And that's all about variance, right? Statistics it's about numbers, and there is no, I suppose if you're a true statistician, if anyone's in here, you would see the poetics in those numbers, but I did not. You're looking at raw data and looking for evidence. The artwork looks for poetics and the in-between space and the interstices and kind of the more emotive elements that come from asking people a question, the anxiety of a term like feminist, or the complexity of asking a mother what she thinks is worth protecting, or, you know, a 28-year-old a guy who's into collecting albums, and how those things collide for me. Do you need to unpack more for me to, like, am I getting there? Okay, okay, great. Are we good? Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.